Hello, my name is Jimmy Allison. I'm an Ableton Live certified trainer and I teach one-on-one lessons online and in Austin, Texas. In this video, I'm going to go over basic drum programming. So now we need to go ahead and just select the drum rack. Go into Live's browser, click on drums, and then you can scroll down until you find a drum kit that you like. If you click on any of them, you'll get a short preview of the kit. Now, I don't recommend spending too much time trying to find that perfect kit. Right now, we're going to focus on creating the pattern and the drum beat. The sound of the drums are relatively unimportant at the moment. So I'm just going to bring in a British kit. Some of the nice default ones to go to is the kit British for more natural sounds. And then for the classic drum machines, we have the 808, the 909, and the 606 and 707 that you can play with. Once the kit's in, you can preview the sounds by clicking on the cells, making sure it's something that you can bear with, something you like. And then go on to the first scene on the first track, right in there in this clip slot on the top. Double click will create a 1-bar MIDI clip. And it'll also automatically switch to clip view. If you notice down here, you'll see on the left, when we have drum rack selected, we can see the names of all the different cells. We can see the bar counts. And then we can also see some other options over here on the left that can be toggled on and off with these little buttons down here. One really handy thing I'd like to point out before we get started is how you can resize clip view. If you look right between clip view and session view, you'll see a little gray line where you can put your mouse and it turns into an up-down arrow. You can drag up and down to resize clip view. You can actually have it take up the entire screen if you like. I like to keep it right about here so I can see some of the clips and a good chunk of clip view. And if you'll notice, on the bottom right, you can switch between clip view and device view by clicking the little tabs on the bottom. And in device view, it collapses down. You can't actually expand device view up, so you get to see your full screen. I use this as a feature personally. So when I'm in clip view, I can hold down shift and hit tab to switch between clip view and device view. So if I want to have more screen real estate for session view, I hold down shift and hit tab. Now I'm in device view and I can see more of my clips. When I want to go back and edit the MIDI clip, shift tab back to the MIDI clip. Another thing I'd like to point out is this preview. I leave it off, but you can turn it on and click on any of the keys to preview the sound. This is really nice if you want to know what a particular sound sounds like. But you can also hear it when you add the kit. So every time I touch the note, it makes the sound. That can be really handy if you want to hear what the note sounds like, but I find it relatively annoying when I'm trying to work. So I generally get an idea of what it sounds like and then turn it off and leave it off. If I need to preview it again, I'll turn it back on or just shift tab back and click on the cell. So now let's just go ahead and leave this first kick drum here, and then I'm going to add another kick drum on the third quarter note, which you'll notice up on the top, you'll see the time division. We have 1 bar, and then it divides into quarter notes. 1.2 is a quarter note, 1.3 is another quarter note, and 1.4 is another quarter note. We're currently in 4/4 time, so we have 4 quarter notes per measure. If you look at the further subdivisions, you'll see 1.33, 1.32. That's telling me that that's the first bar, it's the third quarter note, and then it's the third 16th note. So basically, if you divide it in half, because down on the bottom right, you'll see that the clip is in 16th notes. So each one of these grids is a 16th note. So that's how these numbers are counting out for us. So if you subdivide it, you got your 8th note. Now, if this is really confusing and you're getting lost, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It'll start to make sense as you further progress into writing music and working with it. But the biggest thing to understand is that in 4/4 time, there are 4 beats in the measure, and the quarter note gets the beat. So that's why we see 1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. And most modern music, dance music, is going to be in 4/4 time. I would recommend sticking to 4/4 time in the beginning until you get comfortable with programming beats and doing things like that. Then you can move into odd meter once you have a better understanding of how to work in 4/4 time. So since I already got a kick on the 1 and I got a kick on the 3, I'm going to go ahead and put a snare on the 2 and the 4. And I'm just going to pick the snare hit British, which is the second note up. Now when I trigger the clip with the play button, you'll hear it's a pretty standard boom bap, and it's going relatively fast. So I'm going to slow down the tempo to about 104. And you'll notice right there, this is actually a relatively popular beat, even though it's very simple. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4. But whenever you're listening to music, pay attention. You'll hear a lot of the same beats in the tunes that you listen to. If I speed this up, we'll hear more of a rock. You know, if I slow it down, boom, boom, bum, bum, bum. You know, you can just throw on the bass line or the melodies on top, and you can hear how it works. Let's keep this really simple for right now. I don't recommend going to any other sound just yet. We're just going to work with the kicks and the snares. So what I want you to do is just go ahead and move the third quarter note, the second kick drum right here. I'm just going to advance it 1/8 note, which is 2 cells because we're in a 16th note grit. And what you're going to hear is your basic hip hop beat. And if I speed it up, it gets into rock. It's the same as that other beat. It's a very simple, basic beat that's used in many, many different types of music. And now we get into the drum and bass realm. It's probably the most recognizable in drum and bass and hip hop, but if you listen to a lot of rock music, you will hear this beat quite often. So the tempo kind of sets the genre or the mood. So you want to kind of pick whatever tempo you want to work with. If you're going to program a lot of hip hop, stick it around 90 to 100. A little bit faster breaks and rock and roll, you might want to go a little faster between 1 and 120, 130, get up into 140s like break beat, and then getting up into like 150, 160, 170, 180, and you're getting into more like drum and bass realm and various other types of music. So from here, the best thing to do is just play around, experiment. You can just stick with the kicks and snares. You can move kicks, you can add kicks, you can move snares, you can add snares. But for now, I recommend leaving the first kick drum where it's at. There are beats that omit the downbeat called a 1-drop, but for right now, let's just go ahead and keep that first kick drum there. So I'm just going to show an example. I'm going to add a snare. And then maybe another kick drum. You can move it around. Now the next thing I want to do is go ahead and adjust the velocity because everything's just hitting exactly the same time. Pressure. And drummers tend to use their velocity to create the rhythm. So if I just clap my hands, that's kind of not much of a rhythm. But if I vary up my velocity, I just created a rhythm. Same notes, clapping out 16th notes. Except for the first one, it just sounds like I'm banging on the wall or something. And the next one sounds more rhythmic. So let's go ahead and do that in our beat. What I like to do is this first kick drum is the downbeat. It's the 1. I like to have that to be kind of like the hardest hit. So I'll pull down this other kick drum just a little bit, and especially because this kick drum kind of leads into that snare drum, and then this kick drum kind of leads into the downbeat. So I'm just going to bring it down just a little bit. And I'm going to bring this guy down just a little bit as well, maybe even a little bit more than the other one. And you can start to hear that the kick drum starts to lead in. It's like boom ba, boom ba. I'm going to do the same thing with this snare. This snare is kind of an extra, almost like an accent. So I'm actually going to de-accent it first. And then I'm going to accent it. I'm going to de-accent this one, just so you can hear the difference. And you also notice that the actual sound of the snare changes. On some drum racks, they'll multi-sample the instrument, so that way you can, when you hit it harder or softer, it'll actually be the sound of it being hit soft, which kind of changes the way it sounds rather than just turning the volume down. On other ones, sometimes the velocity just adjusts as the volume. But whichever way it's working, it's always good to play with your velocity. It's nice when you have the extra samples of how it sounds when it's hit soft, but even just volume changes are very helpful in your rhythm. So actually, I kind of would like this to be a little bit more. All right, now the next thing I want to add some hi-hat. So let's just add some closed hi-hat. So I'm going to locate hi-hat closed British vintage. I'm going to put a hi-hat right here at the beginning on the one. I'm going to stop here. Now take a good listen to this right here. That kick and that hi-hat are being played at exactly the same time. That generally doesn't happen, exactly to the precise millisecond is the same time. That's not something that generally happens in nature, and also that's not generally something that happens because of the groove. So it has no groove. When everything happens on meter precisely at the same time, and everything that happens at the same time on top of each other, it doesn't have any groove. And the other thing, it gets in the way of the sound of the kick drum. So in the end of your mix, when you're really trying to push that kick drum out, you're like doing it, you're turning it up, you're compressing it, you're doing all of these things, you're side chaining it, you're doing all of these things to make the kick drum sound really punchy and in the mix. We can start right now in the beginning by programming the beat so that way that the hat happens after the kick drum. And what you'll hear is the kick will come in a lot stronger. You'll hear the kick first, and then you'll hear the hi-hat. Really quickly, it won't sound like it's off, but it will sound the kick more punchy and the hat with more of a groove. Now let's go ahead and put our next hi-hat in there. I'm going to pull that off, and this is more for groove. I'm going to shorten the end of the hi-hat a little bit too for future purposes. And if I want to add more complex little hi-hat pattern, I could do something like this. And I can adjust the velocities. I always like to bring the velocity down on the second one. So maybe something like that. That could be cool. And you notice I'm just working in this first quarter note. Now I'm going to click on the 1.2. And I'm going to drag, like you click to select it, and then hold your mouse down and drag back to the 1. Now I have selected the notes, but don't think of it as selecting the notes. What you're actually doing is selecting a quarter note of time. And the reason we're doing this is because I'm going to duplicate I'm going to click on the note and I'm going to say duplicate. And I like to use the hotkey Command D. It's Control D on PCs. And what that did is it kept the notes relative in time, but duplicated them down. So now they're all the same. Now I can go make some edits. And maybe I do or don't like the groove. I like to move everything around. One thing I do like to do with the hats, even though we just duplicated it, is I like to touch each one, adjust the velocity of each one. This is called humanizing. Now there's algorithms and there's grooves and there's all these other things that you can do to humanize your beats. But you'll see if you start to practice this method that it's actually quicker just to do it yourself, because you have a lot more control over the rhythm. You can get in there and really tweak on the rhythmic feel and the vibe based on whatever it is that you're going for. And I might even want to add, let's try adding a open hat. So I'm just going to click to drag to select this one note, and I'm going to move it up to the open hat, and you'll see it right here. If I click on the actual note, you'll notice that it gives me a bunch of marching ants, which is really handy when we make selections. So it'll select everything in that note range. But it's also really handy when you want to find where something is. There it is. I just located it. Now I can go down and move this up to my open hat. And then from here, I'm going to go further edit my beat and have some fun with it. Let's get these snares off, but I'm not just going to move the snare off. What I'm going to do is select both the hat and the snare and then move them off together. So now they maintain their relationship, and I'm starting to create my groove. Same with this kick drum. I'm going to pull off just a little bit. I'm going to pull everything off grid just a little bit. And depending on what you're going for, you can really tweak out that groove. You can also rush the beat too. I like to lay my beats back most of the time, but you can put them before the line to rush it. And you'll notice if you have Ableton Live 9 that you can actually click on the note and drag it free of grid until you get past the grid, and then it snaps. So now it's snapping the grid, and it'll do a really neat snap trick. It'll snap to where I had it, and then it'll snap to the line, and then to where I had it, and then to the line. It's pretty cool. So I can move this note around. And then if I want to move it free of grid again, I just put it where I want it, let go, grab it again, and move it. Also, another thing that I was actually doing earlier but I didn't talk about was how to change the velocity. Down on the bottom here, you'll see your velocity, and you can actually grab on it and move it up and down with your mouse. But there's another way to do it that I find to be more efficient and more useful, especially when you get a lot of beats kind of stacked on top of each other and you're not sure which is which. And it's also actually relatively quicker. You scroll over the note and you hold down Command, and I believe it is Option or Control on. It's probably Control on the PC. It's been a while since I've had a PC, so it's probably Control. So hold down the button without touching anything. You'll see it turn into an up-down arrow. Keep the button held down and then click and drag up and down will adjust the velocity, which is really cool because I can quickly go from note to note and make any adjustments that I might feel like I need. Let's try another kick drum actually. Oh yeah, see that's the really neat thing about rhythm. One little thing can totally change it around. So I just added that one little kick drum, and it just totally really, I don't know, I really like this beat actually. Just to hear it without it, I'm actually going to select the kick drum I'm going to hit 0 on my keyboard, and that will deactivate the note. So I can kind of A-B it. Let's bring it back in. So you can see there's a lot of little cool things to do. Now, what I highly recommend when you're just starting out, and this video is for people just starting out. That's the whole point of this video. When you're just starting out with programming drums, and when you're just starting out with just MIDI in general, drums is the best place to start because you can start to get to know using the MIDI editor and playing around, but stick to kick, snare, hat. Don't use anything else just yet. Just stick to those 3 parts of the drum kit. Now think about a lot of great bands, like the Beatles for one. They had 1 kick drum, 1 snare drum, 1 hi-hat, and 1 tom. That's all he had. That's all Ringo had. A lot of bands are like that. They'll just have a very simple kit. There's even some out there that don't even have toms because you don't really need all of that. The biggest thing about a drummer is just to drive the song. And you don't need 50 million pieces of a kit to do that. You can keep it very simple. For programming, even if you're programming house music, jungle drum and bass, or anything like that, stick to simple stuff first, learn that really good, and then move on. So back to the programming. I'm going to stick with this, but when you're working a beat, feel free to experiment. Stick to 1 bar, move things around until you find something you really like, and then just kind of tweak on it a little bit. And then when you're happy with it, go over here and hit the double loop button. It's actually duplicate loop, but I call it double loop because on the push it's called double loop. So I'll tend to refer to it as double loop. But if you click that button, it'll duplicate the loop and expand the measure. Now you have 2 bars that you can work with. You can mess, this is the one time in this process where you could go back and mess with the first bar, but let's just mess with the second bar for now and see what we can do. I'm going to take away that extra note. Nah, I didn't really like that. I'm just going to look at some little things I can do to tweak this beat. That could be cool. Let's see what we can do here. Maybe make it a little more complex. You can take beats, you can add beats away. Take beats and add beats. There we go. I like that. Nice little. That's it. That's getting into a nice groove. Next thing I'd like to do is go and address the hi-hats. Even if I don't change the hi-hat pattern, I like to kind of give them a wiggle and adjust the velocity a little bit just so that it's not exactly the same. Your ear picks up on these things subconsciously. And this is the difference between a very boring repetitive beat and a very groovy repetitive beat, is that it has a lot of character and interest. Like if you listen to hip hop, some hip hop songs, all they have is this one really fat, really groovy, like 2-bar beat, the entire song, and you don't get sick of it. And you're like, this is so awesome. So that's the magic. So that's good. So you notice I didn't mess with the first bar. I only messed with the second bar. And I didn't go all crazy changing it. I just added a few kick drums. That was it. Now I'm going to hit double loop again. And I'm going to do the same thing, but with the 4th bar. And if you don't want to hear the whole thing while you're kind of editing, you can go right up top and you'll see the little speaker pop out where you can click to play it from. So, I can add some snare drums if I want. I can zoom in. You got your zoom tool when you go right up here. Let's hear how that sounds. Don't like it at all. Let's get rid of it. So actually, what I'm going to do is give you a nice example of a rest. So I'm just going to pull out all these notes here, and let's leave that for now. Let's just see how that sounds in the body of the music. See that little rest right there? Throws it back to the 1. Now, you can go one more. Go to 8 bars, and maybe that's about it. I don't recommend going beyond 8 bars. In fact, I recommend stopping at even 4 bars, or even 2 bars, or even 1 bar is cool. And the principle of that is we don't have a song. If you write a very complex beat that is 128, 256 bars, then it's just a beat. You know, there's nothing that it's working with. You know, when musicians write songs, they usually get together like, oh, I have this, check out this little thing I got going on. And the bass player's like, yeah, dude, that's pretty cool. It kind of goes with this other thing I was working on. And then next thing you know, everybody's writing a song. He didn't write the drum pattern of like a 6 minute, 5 minute, 3 minute song. The drummer didn't say, hey, I got this song written. It's just drums. You guys go ahead and write some stuff to it. No, they got together and they worked in parts and pieces. And Ableton really shines for that, because now I can come up here. I can even just duplicate this clip down, and then I can go and do things like take away the hi-hats. And now I have the same pattern, no hats. I can switch between them. Or I can just start this whole process again really quickly. I'm just going to do the same thing where I put a kick on the 1, snare. Let's get this rolling. Let's go ahead and maybe put this snare over here. And then maybe another kick drum. You notice how it really comes together really quickly. And let's maybe adjust some of the velocities here. And then I can add my hi-hats. Let's just get a closed hat. I'm just going to do a quick little 16th note pattern here. And then I'm going to select all of my hi-hats, shorten them, so that way I can adjust their grooves. If I didn't shorten them, they'll kind of eat each other. Like this hat just ate that hat and it's gone. And I'll just duplicate that out, just like before. Duplicate the loop. This is actually slow what I'm doing right now. You can actually do this even faster than what I'm doing it. Usually, little snare roll. Maybe a little lead in for that snare roll. There we go. Nice little flam. And that's the magic right there. What I really recommend is what you do is you practice making beats with these guidelines. Don't spend more than 5 minutes per clip. Don't go more than 8 bars. Actually, I've been kind of wanting to say don't go more than 4 bars. Do some where you don't go more than 4 bars. You can do some with 8, but don't spend more than 5 minutes. Time limits. You want to get that down to about a minute. You can write beats in seconds, because the beat is there so that you can further continue to come up with an idea of writing a song. Right now, I got basically two beats. They kind of go together. I'd probably modify this one a little bit to go with this one a little bit better, because they don't quite match up, or maybe write another beat. So write a bunch of beats just to practice. And then if you write 3 beats at a time, like 3 beat chunks, you can actually make entire songs about that. And in later videos, I will go into more detail on that. But for now, I'm going to end this right here and say, go ahead and review the video, look back over things, ask questions down in the chat, and in the comments, actually, and have fun. Again, I teach online lessons privately, which we're allowed to focus directly on your needs and your wants, your style, whatever it is that you want to do. And we can move really quickly or slow or whatever pace is needed to be moved at, because it's an individual one-on-one thing. And check out my website, austinabletontutor.com. Thanks, guys.